Hey folks, here at OS Reviews. You're watching our throwback review of the Samsung i8510, or the Innov8. And as the name suggests, this was a camera phone. It's also a smartphone, but you can see the back has a 8 megapixel sensor that was fairly large for a device that came out in 2008. Back then, it competed with the Nokia N95 and has a similar slide-out keyboard. You can see it's a T9 style keyboard. It's not full QWERTY, but it's decent enough for texting and dialing by feel. Otherwise, there was a rather large 2.8-inch display on the front, although it's not touch sensitive, and just like the N95, it ran on Symbian OS, which of course here in 2017 is very outdated. So other specifications about this rather unique smartphone from Samsung included an optical trackpad or a mouse which you can use to navigate around the phone. There's also a front-facing camera for video chatting, 8GB or 16GB of built-in memory expandable via a micro SD card, also pretty large for the time. And there is a 1200 milliamp hour capacity battery on the back, which you can remove by popping up this metal plate. So a pretty interesting mechanism that they used. And of course the battery is user replaceable, so you can purchase sets and then charge them up when you're on the go, and just using this as a point and shoot camera, since it is good enough to replace a low-cost digital camera for some quick snaps. Otherwise, processing package is definitely slow by 2017 standards, and there is a whopping 330 megahertz ARM11 processor complemented by 128 megabytes of RAM. But despite these relatively low configurations, the phone still runs smoothly because Symbian is relatively optimized, just like Windows Mobile, to run on lower hardware compared to all the animations and fancy stuff that we see on the newest versions of Android and iOS. There's also an accelerometer, there's Wi-Fi, there's GPS, there's Bluetooth, so all the connectivity needs are fully decked out. So taking a closer look at the design, it's a fairly compact phone. Again, the screen itself is nicely large, and the bezels are still relatively slim. There's a earpiece on the top. Down below we have two hotkeys, which takes you into the menus of various things. The center key can also be tapped down, which is the optical pad. There's a four-way D-pad, two more keys which are customizable, and a talk and end key. The keypad, which slides out and is spring assisted, is also backlit, but just like the Motorola Razr, it's kind of flat, so a little difficult to dial by feel. On the side, there's access to a standard micro USB port for charging, which is covered up by a flap, a standard 3.5mm headphone jack, a pretty nice volume rocker, and a lanyard strap. On the other side, there's access to a two-stage camera shutter key that really makes the phone feel like a camera when you're holding it, and there's also a micro SD card slot, which is hot swappable. Finally, there's an interesting mode selection key where you can toggle between taking images, recording video, and playing back your recorded media. So again, a lot of features and emphasis has been put on that camera functionality. This is a quad-band GSM device that is an unlocked phone, so when it came out, it was relatively expensive. And today it remains kind of a rare phone to see here in the United States, just because it never came with a contract subsidized here in the US. So taking a quick look at the software side of things, they have done a bit of customization on top of Symbian version 9.2, so you can see that most of the icons and color schemes have been tweaked, but some of the things like the battery status, reception, are the same that you would find on a Nokia phone, for example. There's time and date stamps, and in the main kind of shortcuts, you have access to your contacts, your settings, some basic utilities like a calculator, file manager, Google Maps, and notes. Over here we have kind of our calendar. There's also a music player on here. Next there is the FM radio, which requires you to plug in a pair of headphones as the antenna. And finally, down below here we have the personalization, so we can change the profiles, themes, and wallpapers, stuff like that. So these are some quick launch shortcuts that Samsung built in. To access more features, you can tap on the Chrome key, and that takes you into the standard menu. Here we see that we have access to messaging services, our contacts. There's office tools, things such as, again, the notes, alarm clock, Adobe PDF Reader, Quick Office, which allows us to quickly edit and view Word, PowerPoint, and Excel documents. There's also unit converters on here, and a smart business card reader or scanner that saves information when you take a snapshot with the camera. So going back, there's also connectivity, so you can see that we have access to IM clients, connection manager, USB OTG, stuff like that. Under tools, there's access to GPS data, print OTG, device manager, call inbox, and under settings there's access to more info about the memory. One area that the Innov8 is showing its age though is in the screen resolution. It measures only 240 by 320 pixels, so it's definitely not super pixel dense, even though it offers 16 million colors and it's a traditional TFT LCD panel. Regardless, it's sufficient for some basic images and videos, and it still does an okay job as a media player. You can see some bloatware has been pre-installed to give you more media highlights, such as news stations, stuff like that. But of course, since it's running on standard Symbian, you can potentially download any apps you want to that runs on the platform, either online or using a computer, and drag it into this phone's memory and install it. So there's not really a huge consolidated app store like we see in modern day smartphones, but there's still a lot of third-party apps and programs that you could find on this device. Tapping on web launches into the browser directly, whereas Google takes you into some quick shortcuts like a Google search, Gmail, and Maps, which again, still all function as advertised. So the first thing that we should really take a closer look at, I guess, is the camera, since that is the main highlight of this phone. We're going to unlock it, and then after tapping and holding for a few seconds, you'll notice that the lens cover will open automatically. Now, in terms of the menu, we have quite a few things that we can customize from. The D-pad becomes a navigational array for things like the white balance, saturation levels, and there's also a number of images remaining, as well as some status modes like resolution of our shots displayed on the top here. Using the volume rocker, I can also zoom in and out, again using that digital zoom as opposed to optical. That works okay if you really need to zoom in all the way. Tapping on options, I can look at some more things like changing between shooting modes, panorama is on here, scene selection, size, white balance, effects, and shortcuts. So these are all things that can be customized and turned on or off, and you can see that overall navigation is still relatively speedy and there's not too much delay despite the 300 megahertz processor. So let's take a quick sample shot. If I have, let's say, a camera over here, and there we go. So it takes a little bit longer to focus than on a 2017 smartphone for sure, but your images still come out relatively clean looking and sharp looking, although colors are on the muted side of the spectrum. They're not as vibrant or popping as I would have preferred, but alright, especially for a phone that is almost 10 years old. So in terms of options, I can also edit this photo. I can use it as my wallpaper. I can also delete it, of course, and share it with friends and family using social media. So this is one of the applications where we can use the accelerometer to rotate the screen orientation and then easily tap on a shot and to load it up. You can see it takes a few seconds just because the image needs to buffer, and again, it's one of the areas where the lower speed of the processor does hinder the performance ever so slightly, but it's not a huge nuisance. It seems like once the photos are loaded once, they remain loaded, so it doesn't take as much time to view it back a second time. Checking out some of the web apps on the phone, starting with Google Maps, you can see it's a relatively early version that was installed here, although obviously you can upgrade it yourself. And GPS signals are okay, but if you're indoors, like we are right now, it has a tougher time of seeking the signals. However, it does work, and for scrolling, you use the trackpad to navigate around the maps. And of course, you can tap on options to zoom in, search by location, see the satellite view, favorites, as well as searched for directions. So these things all work, and since there is a real GPS chipset, you can walk around and it also moves around with your position on the map. So that's nice to note. So exiting out of this and taking a look at some of those other apps. In terms of Google search, I think by default this version was not in the US, since you can see that the default Google search page, maybe the cookies or the cache haven't been reset yet, but it seems to be in a foreign language. And you can see that you can use the trackpad like a optical mouse now to navigate around and select things like links or text boxes to tap on, and afterwards you would simply text using the T9 layout. You can see it's not in a QWERTY traditional layout that we're used to now, but you would basically hunt and peck, and it uses predictive text to type in letters. So for instance, you can type a few things out. You can tap on it 3 times, for instance, if you have to get to a particular key very quickly, or you can use the auto-predictive text, which is a software thing for it to find the words on screen as you're typing. It's not the worst keyboard in the world, but certainly isn't as convenient as a full QWERTY layout that we see today. So the web browser is okay. It will still load up most pages without too many problems. With that being said, it's again a little outdated, so if you're looking at more complex sites, it will definitely struggle more. However, you can still go to the mobile version of YouTube and watch a few video clips from there, so that's a decent experience. The built-in speakers on this thing isn't super impressive, even though they're stereo and located on the back, since they're a little easy to muffle. I would recommend plugging in your own headphones if you are using this as a dedicated media player, which it still does a decent job of, since it plays back a number of codecs of video without any problems, encoded up to 720p. Reception in the Seattle region remains decent, and we would consistently get roughly 3 bars on T-Mobile's network here, and call quality was nice and clean sounding. The microphone is noise canceling, so it picks up your voice pretty well. And as far as battery life is concerned, the Innov8 isn't quite as long as we would have liked to see. On standby, I can get roughly 3 days of use, but if I'm using this constantly with all the internet features on and taking a lot of snapshots, then the battery will drain in about a day and a half. And that's not great, considering we have smartphones like phablets with much larger screens, more beefy processors, and higher quality displays in general that also last for about the same amount of time. So considering a phone this old, really without as advanced functions and a slower processor, you would think that it'd be more energy efficient, but unfortunately no, the battery is not a highlight on the Innov8. So anyways, guys, that was a look back or a throwback review of the Samsung i8510, the Samsung Innov8. In 2017, it's more of a collectible phone than anything. I think that it's an interesting alternative to the Nokia N95, which is another iconic phone running on Symbian. It has an interesting optical trackpad and actually a pretty decent camera. In fact, in the back, it looks more like a camera than a phone. However, it doesn't really impress in terms of its performance, by today's standards. Regardless, it makes a good backup for traveling as a backup device, or if you are someone who just wants to take a few quick snapshots and upload them and share to your social media, this makes a decent option as well. So thanks for watching this video here at OS Reviews. This has been the Samsung Innov8.